Fletcher Knox paid $12 for a horse. That was the deal. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a simple transaction at a dusty trading post 70 miles south of the Northern Pass, where winter was coming fast and a man, without transportation, was a dead man walking. But when he woke at dawn 3 days later, two women stood at the edge of his camp, silent as stone, watching him with eyes that held something between accusation and desperation. Fletcher had been exhausted the night before, sleeping deeper than usual after 3 days of hard riding through territory that didn't forgive mistakes. The women had moved like people used to traveling without being noticed. One held a small bundle of belongings tied with leather cord. The other carried nothing at all. Behind them, the mare he'd bought the day before grazed peacefully, as if their presence made perfect sense. Fletcher sat up slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle beside his bedroll. The older woman noticed. She didn't flinch, didn't step back. She just tilted her head slightly, like she was measuring whether he'd actually use it. Like she'd seen men make that calculation before and knew how it usually ended. 3 days earlier, Fletcher had been 70 miles south with empty pockets and a deadline that felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Winter was coming to the high country, moving down from the peaks like a wolf pack closing in on wounded prey. Crossing the Northern Pass without a horse meant dying on a frozen trail that nobody would find until the spring thaw turned the snow to mud and revealed what the mountains had claimed. The trading post had been his last chance. A weathered collection of buildings clinging to the edge of tribal land, where deals got made in the gray spaces between territories. That's where he met Chief Takota, an older man with hands calloused from decades of hard work and eyes that carried the weight of decisions that kept his people alive in a world that wanted them erased. The mare was magnificent. Strong shoulders, intelligent eyes, the kind of horse that could carry a man through hell and still have strength left for the journey home. When Takota named his price, $12 exactly, Fletcher thought luck had finally turned in his favor. He should have known better. Nothing that perfect ever came without a price hidden somewhere in the fine print. Now, standing in his camp with two women who'd appeared like ghosts in the morning mist, Fletcher realized the fine print was standing right in front of him. "Where did you come from?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, dried out from sleep and the mountain air that cut like broken glass. The older woman glanced at her companion, then back at Fletcher. When she finally spoke, her accent was thick, but her words were deliberate, chosen with care. "Takota sent us. Part of arrangement." Fletcher felt ice slide down his spine. "What arrangement?" "I bought a horse. That's all." "Yes, horse." She gestured toward the mare, then back to herself and her sister. "And us." The words hit him like a fist to the gut. His mind raced through the transaction, replaying every moment. The old chief's strange urgency, the way he'd kept glancing toward the hills like he was expecting something. The odd phrasing when he'd said the horse came with everything needed for the journey. Fletcher had thought he meant supplies, maybe a saddle blanket. Not this. Never this. "I didn't agree to this," Fletcher said, his voice harder now, edged with the kind of anger that came from being manipulated. "I don't know what your father thinks, but I'm not in the business of buying people." The older woman's tone cut through his protest like a blade through silk. "He is not selling us." "Then explain it to me." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes. "Fear, maybe. Or calculation. You leave at sunrise tomorrow?" "That was the plan. Then we go with you. 3 days. After that, we separate." She paused, her jaw tightening with determination that looked like it had been forged in fire. "Or we all die here." Fletcher stared at her, trying to read the truth behind the words. The way she said it, flat and certain, sent a warning through every nerve in his body. This wasn't about cultural misunderstandings or strange customs. This was about survival. And somehow, without knowing how or why, he'd been pulled into something far more dangerous than a simple horse trade. "Who's coming?" Fletcher asked quietly, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. The younger woman finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, like speaking the truth too loud might summon the thing they feared. Someone who does not take no for answer. Fletcher looked between them, then toward the tree line where morning light filtered through the branches in shafts of gold. Everything looked peaceful. Birds calling to each other. Wind moving through pine needles. But he could feel it now, pressing against his skin like a change in air pressure before a storm. The weight of unseen eyes. The sense that this clearing, this moment, was the calm before something brutal crashed through and shattered everything. He thought about his $12, about the horse, about the fact that he was alone miles from anywhere, with two women who'd been sent to him like a desperate gamble by a father who'd run out of options. He could refuse. Send them back. Keep to his own plan, his own survival. But the look in the older woman's eyes told him everything he needed to know. If he did that, he'd be sending them to their deaths. And whoever was hunting them would probably come for him next anyway, just for being a witness to whatever this was. Just for being part of the story they wanted erased. 3 days, Fletcher said finally. Then you tell me everything. And I mean everything. The older woman nodded once, relief flickering across her face so quickly he almost missed it. 3 days. Fletcher grabbed his rifle and moved to the fire pit, stirring the cold ashes back to life. His hands worked automatically, breaking kindling, building the structure, while his mind churned through possibilities. None of them were good. He'd wanted a simple escape from the territory, a clean break before winter locked the high country down. Instead, he'd bought himself a war he didn't understand with an enemy he hadn't met yet. As the flames caught and smoke rose into the morning sky, Fletcher couldn't shake one thought. $12 had never felt so expensive. And whoever was coming for these women, they were already closer than any of them wanted to admit. They broke camp in silence. Fletcher watched how the women moved, efficient and practiced, like they'd been preparing for this moment their entire lives. The older one checked the tree line every few seconds, her gaze sweeping the ridges with the focus of someone who knew what hunters looked like. The younger one kept her hand near a knife tucked into her belt, fingers never straying far from the worn leather handle. "What do I call you?" Fletcher asked as he tightened the saddle straps, his fingers working the leather with muscle memory built from years on the frontier. The older woman looked up from rolling their blankets. "Ayanna." "And her, Kiona." "My sister." Fletcher nodded. "I'm Fletcher. And I need to know what I'm protecting you from." Ayanna's jaw tightened. 3 days. That was agreement. Agreements change when someone's hunting you. Fletcher met her eyes, holding her gaze until she understood he wasn't backing down. "I'm not riding blind into an ambush." Kiona whispered something to her sister in a language Fletcher didn't understand. The words came fast and urgent, pleading. Ayanna shook her head sharply, but Kiona pressed harder, her voice rising with emotion that transcended language barriers. Finally, Ayanna turned back to Fletcher, surrender written in the set of her shoulders. "There is a man. He wants our father's land. Rich land. Water runs through it year-round, and the soil grows anything you plant in it." She paused, choosing her words carefully like someone navigating a minefield. "He believes if he takes us, our father will have no choice but to surrender everything." "Takes you?" Fletcher felt his stomach turn. "You mean marry you off?" Ayanna's voice went flat, drained of emotion in a way that was somehow worse than anger. "No, not marry. He has done this before, to 2 others from neighboring families. They did not survive to tell what happened to them." Fletcher's hands stilled on the saddle. The morning suddenly felt colder, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the space between heartbeats. "How many men does he have?" 6, Kiona spoke quietly, her eyes fixed on the distant hills. "Maybe 7. They know these hills better than anyone. They have hunted these paths since they were boys." "Then why send you to me?" Fletcher kept his voice level, but inside his mind was racing through tactical calculations. "I'm one man with a rifle and a horse I just bought. What makes your father think I can do anything against 7? Ayanna stepped closer, and for the first time Fletcher saw past her defensive walls, saw the exhaustion carved into her face like canyon erosion, saw the terror she was barely holding back with sheer force of will. Our father heard stories about you. 2 winters ago. The camp near Silver Ridge. Fletcher's blood went cold. How does he know about that? Word travels, even to our people. Ayanna held his gaze, and there was something in her eyes now that looked almost like hope. He heard that you stood between 12 miners and a family they wanted to burn out of their claim. You were alone, outnumbered. You did not run. I got lucky, Fletcher said quietly, the memories flooding back despite his best efforts to keep them buried. And 3 of those miners are dead now because of what happened. But the family lived. Ayanna's voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through her control. That is why he chose you. Not because you are perfect. Not because you win every fight. Because when it mattered, when you could have walked away and saved yourself, you did not. Fletcher looked at the 2 women standing in front of him, at the small bundles that contained everything they owned, at the way they kept glancing toward the ridge line like rabbits that knew the hawk was circling. He thought about the $12 in his pocket that now felt like blood money, about how a simple horse trade had turned into a gamble with lives he didn't know and deaths he might not be able to prevent. This man, Fletcher said slowly, measuring each word. What's his name? Gideon Pratt. Ayanna spit the name like poison that burned her mouth. He owns half the territory through buying, stealing, or taking by force. And he wants the other half. Fletcher had heard that name before, whispered in saloons by men who'd lost everything, cursed by homesteaders who'd watched their neighbors disappear in the night. Pratt didn't just take land through legal theft and paperwork manipulation. He erased people, made them vanish so completely it was like they'd never existed at all. Mount up, Fletcher said, his decision made. We move fast, and we don't stop until dark. With any luck, we can reach defendable ground before they catch our trail. As they rode out, Fletcher caught movement in the trees behind them. Just a shadow. Just a flicker of something that shouldn't be there. He didn't mention it to the women. Didn't need to. Ayanna had already seen it. Her hand moved to the knife at her belt, and her eyes met Fletcher's with a silent message written in the language of people who'd learned to survive by reading signs others missed. They were already being followed. Time had just run out, and the $12 deal had officially become the most expensive transaction of Fletcher's life. They rode hard through terrain that punished every mistake. Fletcher kept them off the main trails, pushing through dense brush and rocky passages that would slow anyone following, but took a toll on horses and riders alike. The mare he'd bought handled it like she was born for this kind of work, sure-footed on loose rock and patient when branches grabbed at her flanks. By midday, the horse was lathered with sweat despite the cold air. Ayanna and Kiona shared a second horse that Fletcher had managed to acquire from a homesteader an hour into their ride. The old man had asked no questions when Fletcher offered him $3 and a warning to lock his doors for the next week. Some things didn't need explaining on the frontier. They stopped at a creek to water the horses. Fletcher scanned the ridge line, while Ayanna filled their canteens with water, so cold it made his teeth ache. Kiona kept watch on the trail behind them, her posture rigid with the kind of tension that came from knowing predators were closing in. How far to the pass? Fletcher asked, his voice low. 2 days if we keep this pace. Ayanna straightened, water dripping from her hands. But they will try to cut us off before we reach it. Why not after? Because after the pass, we enter territory where Pratt has no power. She paused, and Fletcher heard something in her voice that sounded like longing mixed with bitterness. The settlers there do not fear him. They have numbers, unity, everything our people lack. Fletcher heard what she wasn't saying, heard the weight of isolation, of being part of a community too small to stand against men like Pratt who understood that power came from controlling resources and eliminating anyone who stood in the way. How long has he been threatening your father? Fletcher kept his eyes on the high ground, watching for movement. 6 months. Ayanna's voice went quiet, heavy with memory. He started with offers. Good money for the land, enough to relocate somewhere else. When our father refused, the threats began. Then he came with his men and took our neighbor's daughter. Just took her in broad daylight while her family watched. She stopped, and Fletcher saw her jaw clench. They found her 3 weeks later. What was left of her? Kiona made a sound like a wounded animal, and Ayanna immediately moved to her sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. They stood like that for a long moment while Fletcher turned away to give them privacy for their grief. That's when he saw the rider. A single figure on the eastern ridge, too far for a clear shot, but close enough to send a message. The man sat motionless on his horse, just watching them with the patience of someone who knew the hunt was already won, making sure they understood they'd been seen, that running was pointless, that this was just delaying the inevitable. "We need to move," Fletcher said quietly, his hand already reaching for the saddle. "Now." Ayanna followed his gaze and went pale. "That is Cormac, Pratt's tracker. If he found us, the others are close enough to taste our fear." They mounted quickly, and Fletcher's mind shifted into the cold calculation mode that had kept him alive through situations where better men had died. They couldn't outrun 7 men, not with tired horses and rough terrain ahead. They couldn't fight, not 3 against 7 in open country, where numbers meant everything. That left one choice: find a defensible position and hope Pratt's men weren't willing to die for their employer's ambitions. 2 hours later, Fletcher found what he was looking for: a narrow canyon with steep walls and a single entrance that would force anyone attacking to come at them in a funnel where numbers stopped mattering as much. It was dangerous if they got trapped, but it would give them a chance. Maybe their only chance. They made camp in the canyon's back corner, where the walls curved to create a natural shelter. Fletcher positioned the horses behind them and checked his rifle with the methodical care of someone who knew equipment failures killed as surely as bullets. 12 rounds. Not enough if it came to a prolonged fight, but enough to make anyone think twice about the cost of coming through that entrance. "Can you shoot?" he asked Ayanna. She reached into her bundle and pulled out a revolver. Old, but well-maintained, the kind of weapon that got passed down through generations and carried stories in every scratch on the grip. "Our father taught us when we were girls. He said the frontier respects only 2 things: strength and the willingness to use it." Fletcher nodded, a tight smile crossing his face despite the circumstances. "Your father's a wise man." As darkness fell, Fletcher built a small fire. Not for cooking or warmth, but to make their position obvious. If Pratt's men wanted them, let them come where Fletcher could see them coming, where he could control the approach and make them pay for every foot of ground. Kiona sat close to her sister, and for the first time since they'd met, Fletcher saw her crying. Silent tears that reflected the firelight and spoke of losses that went deeper than words could reach. Ayanna held her hand, her own face carved from stone, locked in the kind of control that came from being the strong one too many times. "I am sorry," Ayanna said to Fletcher, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "My father asked too much of a stranger." Fletcher looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman who'd been carrying weight she shouldn't have to carry, fighting battles she shouldn't have to fight, surviving in a world that wanted to break her just for existing in a place someone else wanted to claim. "He asked exactly right," Fletcher replied. "A man who'd turn away from this isn't worth the horse he sold me." The first shout came just before midnight. A voice from the canyon entrance, friendly and calm, like they were old acquaintances meeting on a Sunday afternoon to discuss weather and crops. "Fletcher Knox, we know you're in there, and we know you don't want trouble." Fletcher gripped his rifle and waited, his breathing slow and steady. "Let them make the first move. Let them show their hand." The voice continued, smooth as snake oil and twice as poisonous. "Pratt sent us to collect what's his. You hand over the women, we ride away peaceful. Nobody needs to die tonight." Fletcher looked at Ayanna and Kiona, saw them staring back at him with identical expressions. Waiting to see if he'd keep his word or prove their father's gamble had been a catastrophic mistake. The voice called out again, losing some of its friendly tone. "What's it going to be, Cowboy? 2 women you don't know or your life." Fletcher stood and stepped toward the firelight where they could see him clearly. That's when everything went wrong. A gunshot cracked through the night air, not aimed at Fletcher, but at the canyon wall behind him. Rock shattered and rained down in fragments. A warning shot. A demonstration. Fletcher dropped behind cover as 3 more shots followed, each one closer, showing him how exposed he was. How this could end badly for everyone if he didn't make the smart choice. Last chance, Knox. The voice echoed off the stone walls. You're just a drifter who made a bad deal. Walk away and we'll pretend this never happened. Fletcher glanced back at Ayanna and Kiona. They'd pressed themselves against the rear wall, weapons drawn, bodies tense and ready. Ayanna's face was set with determination, but her hands trembled slightly. Kiona looked younger than her years, eyes wide with fear she was trying desperately to hide. Another voice called out, rougher than the first. We got all night, girls. And Pratt pays us whether you're breathing or not when we bring you in. Cruel laughter followed. The sound of men who'd done this before and never faced consequences. Men who hunted people for money and probably enjoyed it more than they'd ever admit. Fletcher's jaw tightened. The $12 in his pocket had bought him this moment, this choice, this chance to be something more than a drifter running from connections and responsibility. How many can you see? Ayanna whispered. 4 at the entrance. Fletcher checked his rifle. Maybe more in the shadows. They're spreading out, trying to get angles on us. Another voice, this one carrying a threat that needed no elaboration. We're coming in. You got 30 seconds to throw out those weapons and send the women forward. Fletcher looked at the narrow canyon behind them, at the walls that had seemed so defensible, but now felt like a trap closing around them. Then he looked up, following the moonlight to where it caught a crack in the stone. Not a path exactly, but maybe enough of a climb for desperate people. When I start shooting, Fletcher said quietly, you climb. Fast as you can. Don't look back. Ayanna gripped his arm. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Fletcher pulled free gently. But someone needs to keep them focused on this position. Trust me. He moved to the front of their shelter and positioned himself where he could see the entrance. Counted 4 shadows, moving forward with weapons ready. They thought this was over. Thought Fletcher would surrender or die trying to defend a position that couldn't be defended. Fletcher took a breath, aimed at the nearest shadow, and fired. Then everything dissolved into chaos. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but felt like hours. Fletcher moved between cover points, shooting and reloading, creating as much noise and confusion as possible. Behind him, he heard Ayanna and Kiona climbing, their movement masked by the gunfire that turned the peaceful canyon into something from a nightmare. A bullet caught Fletcher's shoulder, spinning him against the rock wall. Pain exploded through his arm, like someone had driven a railroad spike through bone and muscle. But he forced himself to keep shooting. Had to buy them more time. Had to make sure they reached the top before Pratt's men realized what was happening. Another minute. Just 1 more minute of this L, and they'd have a chance. Then he heard it. Ayanna's voice from above, urgent and strained. Fletcher now. He turned and ran for the wall, already seeing the route they'd taken. Already calculating distances and handholds. That's when Cormac, the tracker, stepped out of the shadows directly between him and escape. The younger man held a knife, and his smile said everything Fletcher needed to know about how this was going to end if he didn't move fast and move smart. They fought in the dirt like animals, all technique abandoned in favor of desperate violence. Fletcher took another wound, this one across his ribs when his injured shoulder betrayed him at the worst possible moment. But then Ayanna was there, climbing back down with her revolver aimed at Cormac's head. Let him go. We need to move. They climbed together, Fletcher using his good arm, while pain screamed through every other part of his body. Bullets sparked off the canyon wall as Pratt's men realized what was happening. But by then it was too late. Ayanna and Kiona pulled him over the edge just as a shot tore through the space where his leg had been a heartbeat before. They collapsed on flat ground above the canyon, gasping for air. Fletcher's vision blurred as blood ran down his side, soaking into the dirt. But they'd made it. Against impossible odds, they'd escaped the trap. How far to the pass? Fletcher forced the words out through teeth clenched against pain. 10 miles. Ayanna pressed fabric torn from her dress against his shoulder. Maybe less. But you cannot make it like this. You are losing too much blood. Fletcher pushed himself to his feet, swaying but upright. Watch me. They moved through darkness with Fletcher between the two women. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder as Pratt's men found the climbing route. Time was running out again, but they bought themselves breathing room. Maybe enough to reach the pass. Maybe enough to survive this $12 deal that kept getting more expensive with every mile. Dawn broke slowly, painting the sky in shades that reminded Fletcher of blood. His legs felt like they were made from rope that someone had left in the rain, and each breath came harder than the last. But through his fading vision, he could see it. The pass. The border between Pratt's territory and freedom. Almost there, Kiona whispered, and Fletcher heard hope in her voice for the first time. That's when they heard the horses. Not behind them, where the pursuit had been. Ahead. Coming from the pass itself. Fletcher's heart sank as riders emerged from the gap. 5 of them spread in a line that blocked the only way forward. And in the center, sitting on a black stallion like some kind of frontier king, was a man in expensive clothes that seemed absurd in the wilderness. Gideon, Pratt had been waiting for them all along. Well, Pratt called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. The $12 cowboy. I've been eager to meet you. He gestured to the pass behind him. I'm afraid this road is closed, and you've got nowhere left to run. Fletcher's hand moved to his belt, where Cormac's knife still hung. Behind them, the sounds of the other men grew closer. They were trapped between two forces with nowhere to hide, and no strength left to fight. I am sorry, Ayana's voice broke. We should have told you everything from the beginning. Tell me now, Fletcher said. What didn't you tell me? Ayana met his eyes, and Fletcher saw something there that made his blood run colder than any of Pratt's threats. Our father did not send us to you just for protection. Pratt's laughter rolled across the open ground, and Fletcher realized he'd been playing a game where he'd never known the real rules. Where $12 had bought him something far more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The horse was never the real deal, Ayana whispered. It was a test, to see if you would honor an agreement even when it cost you everything. Why? Because Pratt killed our mother 5 years ago, in front of witnesses. But no one would testify. They were too afraid. She paused, tears streaming down her face now. Our father needed someone who could not be bought or frightened. Someone who would stand when others ran. Kiona pressed something into Fletcher's hand. A folded piece of paper. He glanced down and saw writing. Names, dates, locations, evidence. Our father spent 2 years gathering proof, Kiona said. Every crime, every death, every piece of land stolen. That paper names witnesses willing to testify if someone can guarantee their safety. Fletcher understood then. The entire arrangement clicked into place like a lock finding its key. Takota had sent his daughters with the only thing that could destroy Pratt. Not just to save them, but to find someone who would protect evidence that could bring justice to a territory that had forgotten what the word meant. The $12. Fletcher looked at Ayana. That's what your father had left, wasn't it? She nodded. Everything else went to hiding the evidence. To paying people to write down what they saw. He gave you all he had and hoped it was enough. Fletcher laughed despite the pain burning through his shoulder and ribs. Man sells me his best horse, sends me his daughters, gives me the tools to destroy his enemy. All for $12. He met Pratt's eyes across the distance. That's not a deal. That's a declaration of war. Pratt's smile faded, and Fletcher saw it then. The flicker of doubt. The moment when a powerful man realized he might have underestimated the cost of getting what he wanted. You know what I realized? Fletcher said, his voice carrying across the morning air. You're not afraid of me killing you. You're afraid of what's written on this paper. That paper means nothing without witnesses who will talk, Pratt shot back, but his voice had lost some of its casual confidence. Maybe, Fletcher replied. But you rode all the way out here to stop it from reaching anyone who matters. That tells me it means something. Pratt's hand moved toward his gun. His men raised their weapons. Fletcher felt Ayana and Kiona press closer, their bodies tense and ready for what came next. $12, Fletcher said quietly. Dakota paid $12 for me to make a choice. Stand or run. Fight or surrender. He straightened despite the agony coursing through his body. I'm choosing to make you regret you didn't kill me in that canyon when you had the chance. The morning sun climbed higher, and Fletcher saw something shift in Pratt's eyes. Something that looked like the first crack in a dam before the whole thing burst. Because men like Pratt understood money and fear and power. But they didn't understand someone willing to die for $12 and a promise to a stranger. Kill them, Pratt ordered. And Fletcher moved. Not toward Pratt, but toward the pass. Toward the one place Pratt couldn't follow without risking everything he'd built through intimidation and violence. Run. Fletcher shouted to Ayanna and Kiona. Get across the border. Gunfire erupted. Fletcher felt another bullet tear into him, this time through his leg. He stumbled and would have fallen if Ayanna hadn't caught him, half carrying, half dragging him forward while Kiona ran ahead, screaming for help. 50 yards. 40. 30. The distance closed, but so did Pratt's men behind them. Fletcher's leg gave out completely. He crashed to the ground, pulling Ayanna down with him. This was it. This was how $12 bought 3 deaths and Pratt's continued reign of terror. Then Fletcher heard the most beautiful sound of his life. Voices. Many voices. People emerging from the pass with weapons and determination written on their faces. That's far enough, Pratt. An old man stepped forward, and Fletcher recognized him. Samuel. One of the families he defended at Silver Ridge 2 winters ago. This is free territory, and you're not welcome here. Fletcher counted at least 20 settlers, maybe more emerging from the pass behind Samuel. Not professional fighters, but homesteaders who'd lost family to men like Pratt, who'd been waiting for someone to give them a reason to stand together. Pratt's men looked at their employer, then at the growing line of armed settlers. The calculation was simple. 8 against 20 was suicide, and they weren't being paid enough to die for land they'd never own. Those women aren't yours, Samuel said, his rifle steady. And Knox there saved my daughter's life once. I don't forget debts. His voice hardened. None of us do. Fletcher felt Ayanna pressing cloth against his leg wound while he pulled out the folded paper with his good hand. This lists every land theft, every murder, every witness you thought was too scared to talk. He held it high where everyone could see. They were scared until now. Samuel stepped forward, hand extended. Give it here, Knox. We've been waiting for proof like this for 5 years. Pratt's final threat came desperate and hollow. You deliver that paper and you're a dead man, Cowboy. Maybe, Fletcher replied, his vision fading at the edges. But you shoot me in front of 20 witnesses, and that paper still gets delivered. Either way, you lose. Then Kiona spoke, her voice carrying across the silence with the weight of 5 years of grief. My mother's name was Dean Hoey. She was 32 when Pratt's men burned our home. She died protecting me while I was 17 years old. Her voice broke. For 5 years we waited. My father used everything we had to find proof, to find someone brave enough to use it. $12 was all he had left. But it was enough to buy hope. Samuel took the paper from Fletcher's trembling hand and read. When he looked up, his eyes were cold as winter stone. Walk away, Pratt, while you still can. Because tomorrow this goes to the territorial marshal, and every person here will testify to what you just tried to do. For a long moment, Pratt didn't move. Then he looked at Fletcher with pure hatred. This isn't over. Yes, Fletcher said. It is. Pratt and his men retreated, backing their horses away from the pass and the line of settlers who'd finally found their courage. When they were gone, Fletcher's legs gave out completely. He collapsed into Ayanna's arms as consciousness faded. The last thing he heard was her voice, soft and breaking. You did it. You honored the deal. Fletcher woke 3 days later in a homesteader's cabin with Ayanna sitting beside his bed. The wounds had been cleaned and stitched. His shoulder ached and his ribs burned, but he was alive. Pratt? He asked, his voice rough from disuse. Gone, Ayanna replied, her hand finding his. The marshal came. They found witnesses willing to testify. There's a warrant for murder and land theft. He'll hang or spend his life running. 2 weeks later, news reached them. Pratt had been found trying to cross into Mexico. There had been a brief gunfight with his own men who turned on him when they realized his money was worthless. Gideon Pratt was dead, killed by the same kind of violence he'd used to build his empire. Justice, Fletcher thought. Rough and final, but justice nonetheless. Samuel offered Fletcher work, but when the offer came, Fletcher looked at Ayanna and saw the question in her eyes that matched the one growing in his own chest. "I might stay a while," Fletcher said, "if that's acceptable." Ayanna's smile was all the answer he needed. Months passed. Fletcher helped rebuild what Pratt had destroyed, working alongside Dakota's people and the settlers who'd found their courage at the pass. The wounds healed, leaving scars that reminded him of the night he'd chosen to stand instead of run. One evening, Fletcher sat with Ayanna, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The mare he'd bought for $12 grazed nearby, strong and healthy. Everything Dakota had promised. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayanna asked. "The deal?" Fletcher thought about how he'd wanted a simple escape and got a war instead. How $12 had bought him bullet wounds and nightmares and the weight of other people's lives. But also how those same $12 had given him something he hadn't known he needed. Purpose. Connection. A place where running away wasn't the only option anymore. $12, Fletcher said quietly. "Your father bought the most expensive horse in the territory." He looked at Ayanna, seeing understanding in her eyes. "Because what came with it wasn't his daughters needing rescue. It was me needing to be found." Ayanna leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Behind them, Kiona laughed at something Dakota said. Smoke rose from the settlement's chimneys. Life continued, built on the foundation of a desperate gamble, and a stranger's choice to honor a deal that cost him everything and gave him more than he'd ever imagined. Fletcher Knox had spent years believing he was worth exactly what he could carry in his pockets. No more, no less. Dakota had seen something different, had looked at a drifter, and bet everything on the possibility that underneath the running and the fear, there was someone worth $12 and a prayer. Turned out both of them had been right. The deal was complete. The debt was paid. And Fletcher finally understood that sometimes the price of a horse is just $12. But the cost of becoming the person you were meant to be? That's measured in something far more valuable than money. Something that can't be bought or sold. Only earned through choices made when everything is on the line, and walking away would be easier than standing your ground. $12. A horse. 2 women. And a man who learned that the best deals are the ones that cost you everything and give you back something you didn't know you'd lost. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the choices we make when everything is on the line, then I invite you to explore more tales like this one. Stories where ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances and discover who they really are in the process. Click the video appearing on your screen now for another journey into the heart of courage and impossible choices. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you what it means to stand your ground when the world asks you to run. And if Fletcher's choice resonated with you, if his $12 gamble inspired something in your own heart, consider supporting this channel. Every contribution helps us bring you more stories that make you feel, that make you think, that remind you why stories matter. Until next time, remember this. The value of a person isn't measured by what they own, but by what they're willing to sacrifice for something bigger than themselves. Stay brave out there.